Okay, welcome everybody, both present and online, to this meeting on Beyond Compliance Embedded Ethics in Social Research. I'm delighted to welcome Kim Strom and Anna Sobočan. Strom is from the University of North Carolina, Anna is from the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. For this, and as well, Giuseppe Veltri, who also participate, who is from Trento. Who participate also contribute to the discussion. I think this is a very timely meeting because the topic of ethics in research practice has become increasingly popular, increasingly important, increasingly relevant, both for the public and for funders. At the same time, has been, I think I can say, it's become an increasing source of nightmares for practitioners involved. Ethics is a very delicate topic. Ignoring ethical issues in our practice is certainly conducive to create lots of problems and also possibly also as well a lot of grievances and suffering on the subject, on the object of our research. At the same time, it is something that which is left only to the formal guidelines of legal prescription is also going to may result in a serious damage to our very possibility of conducting proper research. So I think it's extremely important to take a multi-dimensional perspective on the issue and try to take the issue seriously without being really constrained, as I was saying, by its formalistic dimension. This is also the second event, public event following last week seminar on correspondence analysis for the ANSAS-CADE Research Methods Center that we have established in the department. I think it's appropriate, also from this point of view, that we start off our first activities with both an attention, as we paid last week, to the technicalities, to the tools of research, and also to the broader and many ways more complex ethical context of research practice. So, welcome again. I leave the floor to Teresa Bertotti, who is coordinating the meeting, and also, and of course, to our speakers. Thank you.
So thank you, Mario, and thank you to everybody for being here, also here and online. Well, it's a great pleasure for me to present this seminar, because, well, as Mario say, usually a discussion on research ethics focus on regulatory compliance needed to protect human subject. But this compliance, while is essential, it's not enough, and it represents only a fraction of the ethical consideration that we should put into our doing research. And this ethical consideration are most important when we carry out a research with a vulnerable subject, with a marginated subject, as happens in social work research, but also in other social science, and with especially with qualitative methods or those methods who involve the participation of subjects. So this is a very general introduction, and I gave you just a few information about Kim Strom. She is a distinguished professor of ethics and professional practice at the University of North Carolina, US, and of the School of Social Work, and the director of the University Office of Ethics and Policy of the whole university. And she's been an educator over 30 years, and she has authored several books, almost 90, it's huge. And she's a recognized scholar, and she provides training and technical assistance to many bodies and organizations and in several countries, as US, South Arabia, Germany, Georgia, Slovenia, China, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and other countries. Kim Strom is now here since last Saturday until the first days of April as a visiting professor at our department. And if you wanted to talk with her, you can email her, you can email me, and then I will give you her email address, or at the end, we can give the address to those who register to ask if you have some doubts and some other questions. And the second speaker, it's Anna Sobočan. She's assistant professor and researcher at the Faculty of Social Work in the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia at the Department of Social Justice and Social Inclusion. And her teaching covers ethics, disability, gender, and health. And she also research about ethical decision making and ethics in research. And she has co-founded the ethic committees of the Faculty of Social Work and is an elected member of the Ethic Committee for Research with People at the University of Ljubljana. We both three, this is the last thing that I want to say as an introduction, we are co-founding members of a special interest group of the European Social Work Research Association that is called, this special interest group is called SWERG, that means Social Work Ethics Research, meaning that we study the problem of ethics in research, but also how to research ethics. So these two things. So we has a special interest group where we run several workshops in the European conference, but now I'm very glad to present them, to open this seminar. I think they will say something about themselves after, but just a few words how we have thought to organize this seminar. We will have a first presentation by Kim Strom about the general topic it's called Beyond Compliance, Embedded Ethics in Social Research. And then Anna Sobočan will present some examples. Then we give the floor to you if you have some questions, some examples, something that raised to your mind you wanted to share with us here and online. And afterwards, I'm very, very glad that Giuseppe Alessandro Veltri has accepted the invitation to come here. He is a professor here at the university and the department, and he is a member of the committee of, Ethics Research Committee of the University of Trento. And he has done he will talk about this, but he's done a great research on integrity of research. And he will be the discussant and also to help us to wrap up what comes out from this seminar. So I'm very, very glad to open, and I hope I say what is important. But we have decided to have this seminar in English, but obviously if you feel better to speak in Italian when you want to ask questions, you can add the translation or this kind of things. And also if there is something that is not clear, you can raise up your hand and stop. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. I thank everyone at the university for the kind welcome and the beautiful weather and your fantastic facilities and your fantastic region. Really appreciate it. I thank all of you attending in person and electronically. I know there are emails and lists of things to do back in your offices, and so I really appreciate you taking the time to share this with us. And I know that today or in meetings after today that we'll have the opportunity to learn from each other, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you to our technical staff for getting us all set up. We wouldn't do it without you. And also my colleagues. Teresa neglected to say that this is really an outgrowth of a manuscript that we wrote that we had published in late 2019 that is today the most downloaded article in the history of the Journal of European Social Work, Journal of Social Work, and 30,000 downloads. Now, I know downloaders don't equal readers, but I still will take a percentage of that, and as a sign that this is an important topic. And just having come over about 3 weeks ago from the United States, we're very active discussing there the issue of anti-racist research and what it means to be an anti-racist researcher and what it means to do anti-racist research, and a very strong connection between the things that we're talking about in this setting today with issues of justice and equity in research. So it's a timely conversation and one I'm really grateful to have. And I always put my contact information on my slides because my work is made better by the colleagues whom I work with. So just a plan for the session. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment is almost every book chapter or a presentation about human subjects protections goes back to a couple of significant scandals in science, and Tuskegee is one of them. And I'll talk about it, not because any of us are going to be involved in misconduct of that kind, but because many of us may be bystanders or be part of powerful institutions that are capable of such a thing as Tuskegee. So I want to talk about that, and part of our lesson about compliance is necessary but not sufficient for ethical research. The other thing the next thing I want to make clear is that we're all participants in this journey. We're all researchers. We are on the stage, but we are not here to preach, do better. We all struggle with the challenges of balancing the many responsibilities in our jobs and in our lives with our scientific aspirations. And so I want to be clear that we're sensitized to this, and we all are working to try to do better, even if on some days we can't. And then I'll talk a bit about what do we mean by embedded ethics beyond protecting human subjects. I'll talk a little bit about the types of embedded ethics, a few examples, and then some of the remedies we might consider. So Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Many of us have heard of Tuskegee. My students today still think of Tuskegee. It's a town in Alabama. Many of my students still think of it as some little remote place far down south in a past time and place that where bad things happened. In fact, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment took place over 4 decades. 40 years. 13 refereed journal articles were written about the study of Tuskegee, of the results of the Tuskegee experiments. It wasn't just some little thing that was hidden away by a bad researcher. It was endorsed by the most powerful groups in the United States, the Center for Disease Control, or what its version in the 1930s, the American Medical Association, the National Medical Association, which was the medical association for doctors who are, for Black doctors at the time of segregation, and also by the federal government, the Institute of Health and the Public Health Service. So this was a sanctioned, approved, and endorsed study for a good period of time. A little reminder about the study. The study was designed to look at the long-term implications of untreated syphilis. And in order to do so, they enrolled 600 Black men, sharecroppers, which in the United States basically is the next step from slavery, where sharecroppers work for people who own the land and are quite disenfranchised. 600 men were enrolled, 400 who had syphilis, 200 who were in the control group. In 1932, when the study started, well, when the men were enrolled, they didn't know that they had, the 400 with syphilis didn't know that they had an infectious disease. They were told they were being part of the study to study the effects of bad blood. And in exchange for participating in this and agreeing to have their bodies autopsied when they died, they would get their burial costs paid for. That was the primary incentive of the study. The men also got free meals when they were hospitalized and occasional medical checkups, not for their whole health, but to see secretly about the progression of their diseases. This letter, which I know you can't read from there, but it's a letter that went out to the men. Some time ago, you were given a thorough examination, and since that time, we hope you have gotten a great deal of treatment for bad blood. You will now be given your last chance to get a second examination. This will be very special, and after it is finished, you will be given a special treatment if it is believed that you are in a condition to stand it. To be clear, no treatment was given for the syphilis. And the progression of syphilis, as it was described at the time, includes, the progression included blindness, heart disease or heart injury, insanity, and then death. In the beginning of the study, when the study first started in 1932, there was no cure for syphilis. There was a toxic, an arsenic-based treatment that was not super helpful or easy to tolerate. But 11 years into the study, by 1943, penicillin was found to be a cure for syphilis, and yet it was withheld from the men in the study. The person I focus on in this, about the sort of invisible parts of Tuskegee, the person I talk about is Peter Buxton. The black and white picture in the beard, that's from 1974 or 75. He's giving testimony to Congress. And then there he is at around 80, and he is still alive. Buxton had a summer job in 1966 as a contact tracer in San Francisco for sexually transmitted diseases. So he would go out and, taking someone who had been diagnosed, he would go and find their sex partners and alert them to the risk of gonorrhea or syphilis. He happened to be talking to some fellow public health service researchers or contact tracers, and one of them said that a family in Alabama had asked for help because they had a family member who was crazy from syphilis and they wanted treatment. This contact tracer and an external doctor, a doctor outside of Alabama, got help for the man, but then they got reprimanded by the researchers for ruining the study, ruining the subject by giving him a treatment that he shouldn't have had. And so this was just a casual coffee counter conversation that Buxton overheard, and he was very curious. He wrote to the Center for Disease Control and asked for all the papers on the study, which they sent him. Like I said, there was no shame by the people that had done the study. And Buxton was incredibly concerned, and the men were allowed to suffer with the syphilis. They were allowed to infect other people because their disease was current and they didn't know to protect themselves. The treatments were withheld, and the men were also given painful lumbar punctures to test whether the syphilis had moved into their central nervous system. So there was a variety of mistreatments in addition to the existing disenfranchisement of these Black men. Buxton immediately began to lobby the leaders of the scientific groups that were involved, and basically got slapped down at every turn. You're not a doctor. You don't know. We've re-looked at this study. We affirm the merits of this study. And I will just say, he was not the only whistleblower. And in fact, the term whistleblower didn't even exist at that time. So he was acting on a concept he didn't even know existed. There were other whistleblowers, but none as tenacious as he was. He kept trying, and he used different strategies. This will make your profession look bad. This will ruin the reputation of the public health service. This is not how we treat people. This is inhumane. None of those gained him any traction. He actually went to law school and consulted his law professors, who told him that the study, there was nothing that could be done because the statute of limitations had passed. In 1972, he was out at dinner with friends, having his law degree, etc. And a couple of the friends were journalists, and they were talking about stories they were working on, and he said, "I have a story for you." And they're like, "You're ruining our dinner by talking about work." But one of them listened to him, couldn't believe the story. "You mean all of the subjects of the study are Black?" Says, "Can I look at your paperwork?" Buxton gave him the file. And in fact, the person turned it over to an investigative journalist at the New York Times, Jean Heller, and that is the person who broke the story. We face in the United States the impact of Tuskegee today. And a 2016 study on health effects of Tuskegee found that Tuskegee was the study, and the misconduct was responsible for over a third of the life expectancy gap between white men and Black men in the United States. For men over 45, it was responsible for a 1-year decline, a 1-year loss in life expectancy for Black men. And this has only gotten worse and more current as we've come to deal with COVID and vaccination hesitancy and distrust of science. Peter Buxton's story is important because many of us could be Peter Buxton's. He was just a kid doing a job in the summer while he waited to get into law school, and yet he made a huge difference. Sometimes I curse him when I'm trying to do my human subjects protections paperwork with all the bureaucracy. We were talking about this earlier, but what he did has made a difference. And whenever I think of scandals like this, I think, what if something had happened sooner? 40 years. What if it had been able to be ceased in even 10 years? Or what if, wishful thinking, it had never happened at all? So I'm very intrigued by your elevators over here, because in the US, we don't have a 0 floor. But I love this because in my office, my administrative role, I'm director of ethics and policy. And I try to explain that policies are the floor. And in this case, I think policy or compliance is floor 0. It's the ground floor. Some people fall below the ground floor and they do bad things, or they're non-compliant with policies. But there's a lot of room for better behavior above the first floor. And that's the space that integrity takes up. And I don't know if the metaphor works here or will work at home, but it works for me. And let me just say, this goes a bit to the thing I was saying earlier about we walk this journey with you. We all, as scientists, walk this journey together. 2 weeks ago when I was in Ljubljana, one of my colleagues at the University of North Carolina, a very famous genetic scientist, Terry Magnuson, who is also the person in the university who's responsible for all research in the university. And last year, our university did $1.8 billion of externally funded research. It's a huge part of our enterprise. He was cited for ethical misconduct, for scientific misconduct. And he's on now a corrective action plan for his studies having to be reviewed internally, and a variety of other checks and balances. He subsequently resigned, not his job or his endowed chair, but he did resign his administrative position. And in the article it talks about, he says, I made a mistake in the course of fleshing out some technical details of a proposed methodology. And he cut and pasted some things from a technology website or an instrumentation website and put them in as placeholders in his study and never went back to fix them. This is his story. And he blamed the oversight on the pressures of serving as the vice chancellor for research while continuing to work in his genetics lab. And I would just say a bit of there, but for the grace of God go we, because we may not be the vice chancellor for research, but many times we're trying to fit in, work on a manuscript, getting a proposal done in the 30 minutes between meetings or before we go to class. The pace and the volume of work that we do, and I think when I say we, I speak for folks in the room, whether we're from the US or Italy or elsewhere, these create challenges for us. So let me just talk, when I talk about embedded ethics or invisible ethics, the ethics that go from floor 1 to floor 4, if you will, be above floor 0. I just want to talk about a few of the things that what we might be thinking about. One question is whether our work enables injustice. And does it reinforce stereotypes? Could it create backlash on the very community that we're trying to study and help? A colleague was doing research with indigenous populations, and it was a qualitative study, and it had quotes in the manuscript, and there's a research team. She was the only indigenous person as a member of the team, and when she saw the quotes, she said, we can't use these. They make our subjects look ignorant. And people said, but the fact that they didn't know these things is part of why we have to study the issues. And you can imagine the dynamics in the team, and also the feeling of protectiveness of that one member who's part of that indigenous community about, are we creating a stereotype, or are we playing into the very vulnerability of the population we're trying to study? One of my colleagues at UNC has said, race is not a predictor, but racism may be. And maybe that's part of thinking about the structural implications of things in a different way that doesn't call out certain populations. Another example, another embedded ethics example, is whether our choices of what to study and what population to study are biased. And I don't mean biased in a prejudicial way, but I'll give you an example. Years ago, a doctoral student was studying, had developed an intervention and had done RCTs, randomized controlled trials, and piloted this intervention to help men who were getting out of prison adjust to the community. And so the intervention was very sound, helpful, etc. But the men in the study would come up to her and say, we need a place to live. We don't have safe and stable housing, or our housing is back with people who are drug and alcohol using, and therefore we're at risk of having our probation revoked. The men in the study didn't ask for a group. Group's nice, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they needed other things, but the funder didn't want, funders don't want to pay for safe and stable housing. They'll pay for an innovative group, which is good, but not a basic need. So the very choices that we make about what to study and how to study, and the way that funding and sponsorship drives our research is an ethical issue. It's not unethical, but rather it puts us in an ethical dilemma between competing goods, competing choices. The question of our positionality, our experience with the problem, our ethnic, cultural, racial background, and the population we're studying also can be a place for ethical dilemmas. We've talked with colleagues who study young Muslim women, refugees, and sometimes those colleagues come under scrutiny. Why are you, as a male, non-Muslim, non-refugee, interested in this population? And so the lack of sort of identity in common with the study population can raise concerns, but so can being part of that study. Someone who comes to study a problem because they experienced it, whether it's studying substance use or studying high conflict divorces or studying the LGBTQ community. There's a term, and it's a pejorative term, called me search, meaning doing research on our own identities and the term me search is, as I said, it's pejorative, and as if it's sort of this navel gazing, self-indulgent kind of study. But whether we identify highly with the issue or population we're studying, or we don't, we want to ask the question, what's my attraction to this? How does this affect my interpretation of the findings, my decision about how to approach and measure and consider the issues that I find? Boundaries and roles. An issue that affects social workers is, you're a social worker, can't you help me? We may be very clear that we're there in a research function, but we're dealing with people who are in incredible hurt, and we're seen as having the power to call attention to that hurt, and that may challenge our role as researchers. I would say there are also boundaries and roles in research teams, and I guess, part of what I want to say is these ethics, these invisible ethics, aren't just about how we relate to the participants in our studies, but also the team members that we work with in our scientific teams, our peers and collaborators, or our doctoral students, or postdocs, or advisees, or junior faculty. Obligations to the funder or sponsor. Nobody likes null findings, and so we want to make sure that we've got a story to tell as a result of the research. And then also just self-interest. We want to be successful in our careers. We want to get positions at high quality universities and get tenure and get more funding and have prestige. One of the interesting things about higher education is people's self-identity and self-definition comes more from our professional world than our institution in which we work. which makes for an interesting leadership challenge when you are an administrator in the institution. But we were talking about this at lunch. Some subspecialties, some populations, some social issues that really may need to be studied and that we may be very passionate about studying may not have any, may not be well funded. Or working in a community where we really create true partnerships with members of that community takes time. How many other manuscripts could you write by studying something else in a different way, or by relating to that community in a much more exploitive and superficial way? So it's the balancing of ourselves. Certainly, and then volitional challenges goes to this issue of moral courage, which is my particular interest in ethics. And moral courage goes to not just knowing the right thing to do, but doing it. So understanding in any situation, what is it in us or in our organization that keep us from doing the right thing? That keep us from speaking truth to power, or standing up as bystanders or interveners when someone is being bullied as part of our research team, for example. So volitional challenges create ethical dilemmas, and then social and power challenges. Who has the ability to critique things on the research team, resist pressures, act with integrity, the power dynamics, and the power dynamics are, one of my colleagues said, in team science, Black and brown team members always have have less power to guide things or push back on certain issues. And I would say that's true for other identities as well. So that was a lot of maybe worrisome kinds of issues. Let me just give you a few ideas for addressing the embedded ethics. One is our own moral clarity. What is your true north? What is your red line you will not cross? What is the point at which you will stand up for a principle regardless of the consequences? Our ability to anticipate and alleviate problems. Way we plan our research projects and anticipate dynamics may help resolve issues down the road. Offering a more, or at least considering, even if it doesn't make it into the manuscript, considering a more robust account of limitations. When we talk about the limitations of research, we often talk about sampling or methodology or instrumentation. Well, what about talking about the paths not taken or the choices that we were forced to make in order to get the research done? I think thinking about that helps us. Having a diverse and empowered research team, and if it's not the exact team that's working on the research, having collaborators who hold us accountable, who help us live our integrity, co-creating the research with the people who are reflected in the study, and moving from this calling people subjects to calling them participants or even collaborators. Embracing reflexivity and consultation. One definition of moral courage is overcoming the shame and humiliation in order to confess a wrong. And so how do we take an honest look at ourselves and are without shame or ego getting in the way? We want to develop the skills for difficult conversations. It could be I statements. I'm uncomfortable with the way that people are talking about the research subjects. I'm uncomfortable with the way that this finding is being distorted. So I statements, boundary setting, I can't be part of this. And a statement from negotiating called taking a view from the balcony, which is the whole kind of stepping back and kind of seeing the situation. And sometimes that provides incredible clarity of perspective to think, if that was not me in that discussion and I was watching it, what would my position be? What would my opinion be? How would I want to help that person? So sort of that view from the balcony, and sometimes the very act of consultation, when you explain something that's going on in the team to a colleague, just hearing the words come out of your mouth makes it clear that it's not okay. You know, it's kind of a quick splash of cold water in our faces. And then being prepared to walk away. I interview whistleblowers, I interview people of everyday courage, and many of them will say, yes, I paid a price for walking away from this job or this project, but I can look myself in the mirror in the morning, or I will always have my integrity. A quote from the Beecher report, also fundamental guidance on ethics. The only true protection afforded research subjects comes from a well-trained, well-meaning investigator. And I guess if I think about Tuskegee, one of the things that was missing was empathy, this othering of the subjects. And you know, that wasn't just of that time and the racial dynamics in the United States. Othering happens today. And then in a research enterprise supposedly built on a humanitarian ethos, why are whistleblowers so rare? I end, if you look at these slides, I end with a few things that I found to be helpful. One of the books that talks about the historical review of psychology research, Even the Rat Was White, helps to make us think about the accepted conventions that we endorse, perhaps without even thinking. So thank you very much for your time and for the opportunity to talk about this.
Thank you very much, Kim. I suggest we keep your question for after Anna's speaking, and but from home, if somebody wants to start writing on the chat, maybe it takes some time, and we can collect the question afterwards. Okay. So Anna, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. And
yeah. Thank you so much for the word. It's going to be hard to say anything more important than what has been already said, and so motivating as well. I think I'm also very passionate about this field. But what I will try to do today is to offer some questions maybe and dilemmas from our Committee for Research Ethics at the University of Ljubljana, and what are some of the issues or reflections that come from that. But first of all, thank you again for the invitation, and thank you to everyone making this visit possible and making it possible for Kim and myself to speak about the issues that we, as I said, feel passionate about. I hope you won't hold it against me. I will try to look a little bit into my notes, because if I start speaking outside of my paperwork, it can take hours. More. Another one. We can just skip that. So as I think was made really, really clear in what Kim was saying just now, is that ethical issues undeniably permeate all research. So it is important that the questions of ethical practice and research and the ethical considerations and foundations of research are addressed along a broad spectrum of issues that include the research processes, the research methods, the purposes of research, the forms of how we interpret the research data, and issues related to the values and ethical choices of those who fund the research, those who implement the research, and those who participate in the processes themselves. So, but what I think can be said as a general rule about this is that research ethics definitely introduces complexity into the research processes. And while the standards and ethical principles of research may often seem quite simple, sometimes also quite complex, but often simple, ethical dilemmas and controversies just spring up at different places, as was already demonstrated today. And I think that the majority of researchers, especially in social sciences, would at the same time also agree that the ethical lens needs to go beyond the legalistic and codified understanding, as Kim was presenting really nicely, of research ethics to address the socio-political embeddedness of ethical principles and how research can serve as a means of providing knowledge, improving social justice, realizing human rights, and also actually mobilizing social equality and inclusion. And like any social practice, research is fraught with relationships, with interests and with values. And these generate challenges and conflicts and dilemmas. And how these challenges and conflicts and dilemmas are identified or reflected upon and then managed is a matter of ethical scrutiny and integrity. And therefore, ethical governance and ethical considerations both are essential to any research endeavor. So first, research as a scientific inquiry, being usually or traditionally conducted by professional researchers, by doctoral students as well, by practitioners in various professions, and in recent decades also by people who are sometimes referred to as experts by experience, or the research participants themselves. So as the scientific inquiry, research is an endeavor characterized by privilege and also epistemic authority. So who is allowed to hold and exercise the role of the researcher, and whose narrative is usually recognized to a greater or a lesser degree as legitimate and valid for reporting on the issues that are of the public interest being studied, and the stories of people whose problems and lives are being researched. This is a matter of an epistemic as well as a social justice. So discussing the role of research in society uncovers the social aspects of knowledge, such as issues of trust and accountability, the recognition of validity of expertise, the reliability of peer review, the impact of research funding, the power of academic elites, and so on. So the complexity and the contested nature and utility of research begins already here. What is considered knowledge? How is knowledge valued, and how is knowledge judged, and who gets to be recognized as having access to knowledge or having access to creating of the knowledge, as well as what is justified in the name of knowledge, which was also demonstrated perfectly with the Tuskegee case. Then next, research as a scholarly conduct is prone to malpractice, what we also heard today. And in the research field, there are individuals who do, or groups who commit research misconduct and practices that do not comply with institutional, legal, or other research-related policies and rules. And usually, what was also already mentioned, plagiarism or fabrication, falsification, and research misconduct are defined as quite straightforward. They are not very difficult to identify usually. But the questionable research practices are those that are even a greater challenge, because they are so difficult to define. They are sometimes very ambiguous. So finally, research as a social institution is also about responsibilities and relationships. In research, that is a process that directly or indirectly involves a range of actors, meaning researchers, research subjects, associated communities, gatekeepers, academic and professional communities involved in it, review committee members, funders, editors, reviewers of our publications, and also the wider public. So all of those agents exercise their interests and apply their values that produce and influence research outcomes and consequences for research subjects and their communities, for consequences for researchers themselves, for scientific communities, for science also, and ultimately also for the society. So it is, we can say, a social practice that is permeated with ethics and politics, and this inflicts researchers with a lot of responsibilities, I would say. And what, yes, thank you so much. And just a quote that I find quite telling. Research is about the creation of knowledge, and the role of knowledge is ultimately to serve the goal of advancing our societies and human well-being. So I agree with what Ikhofen writes or says. We can, of course, have flaws in the scientific findings, and Skim also pointed out just the room also for looking at what inhibits or how our studies are limited or flawed, more widely discussed and more and questioned more. And I think the debate today is about a lot of questions. So posing more and more questions, and maybe not always being able to provide directly the answers, but asking questions. Thank you, Teresa. So let me, next one. Yes, the next one. So please allow me to introduce to you shortly. I chose 3 areas or 3 topics that come from, as I said before, the work of the Research Ethics Committee at our school, which was founded to work with or to support the research that is happening in social sciences. Traditionally, and this might be the case still in some countries, traditionally one of the first committees were established in the fields of medicine usually, and this was the case also in Slovenia up until almost recently, up until 5, 6, 7 years ago. The majority of research that involved human subjects was supposed to go through the lens of the research committee, actually at the medical school or the medical faculty, regardless whether the field of research was medicine or not. So a couple of years ago, this committee was established, and I was looking through, preparing for this session today, I was looking through the cases that we looked at and the conversations that we had in the process of looking at them or providing our evaluation estimation of those. And what was very apparent also in looking at the many of the applications was that often research was really, or the research application was prepared really correctly in all respects, if I may say so, correctly in terms of the policies or the guidelines that we do have at the moment, that we did establish in time, and they might improve in the future, of course, hopefully they will improve. But all 3 of the research that I present here were impeccable. So the application itself was spotless from the perspective of the policy and guidelines. But having conversations about this in the small team of the research committee raised a lot of questions. The first one of the research was actually in an institution for women with intellectual disabilities. And here we found that the researcher, this was actually a doctoral researcher, that we felt that more planning needs to be done also around the Research Act itself, or the implementation of Research Act itself. So what happens to the people after the researcher leaves the scene? How does that impact the relationships there? Here we also discussed, for example, what is the role of a mentorship? Because, as I said, this was a doctoral student. Could the research plan be more elaborated with more support? The second example like that was in a research with people who are dying. And actually the conversations that the researchers were supposed to have would probably be one of the last conversations that these people would experience in their life. Again, everything was prepared impeccably. For example, the application also said the researchers will receive a short training before they go into the field. But we were concerned because we felt, do the researchers have enough, these were really young researchers, do they have enough experience to do research that is so impactful, that is so intense in many ways? Will they receive supervision during their research activities? Or how, for example, are they prepared in responding maybe to relatives of the dying after they die? If they ask them, can you share the last interview with us? So are they, these kind of things we felt maybe more can be done in that respect as well. The last one, we were concerned with the research project objectives and aims. This was a project in mental health literacy, and the researchers aimed also to provide people living in rural communities with information about the use of pharmaceuticals. Here we were concerned about the objectiveness of research in a way. The first stage would be to ask the participants what they know about mental health and the use, and the immediate second step would be to inform them about it. We were worried that the information doesn't come from the research itself, but it comes from the outside, actually, from maybe even from the interested pharmaceutical companies. So again, the majority of research that we looked at and discussed had a lot of thinking was done behind it, of course. It was prepared impeccably, but again and again it shows there might be some questions that we still need to ask, or there might be some aspects that we still can improve. And I'm sure that our committee was not perfect in giving all the answers or providing all the support, but just at least opening new questions, asking more than it was clear or present at that time. Yes, maybe we can. So some ideas in research and social science research. We often take the lead on that we have come to recognize the importance of scrutinizing also the power relations, for example, and the privileges embedded in the social work that we study, but less so are we addressing the power relations, the privilege and discrimination in the research cultures themselves, in actually the relationships between the researchers. This was also a bit present in all of the three examples that I presented. Meaning in the research cultures that we are inhabiting ourselves as researchers and nurturing them. And this might also be the next and quite urgent topic, because good science cannot be produced in environments that are poisoned. The quality of research also relates to the skills and abilities of the researcher, as was our second case, which are acquired not only through learning the research methods, but also through experience itself in conducting the research. This constitutes somewhat tested knowledge, and mentorship in working with fellow researchers in effective and sustainable relationships is critical to sustaining a good scholarly practice. We also see that. So I think that ethical research must be seen as a joint effort by all the research participants, the researchers, the participants themselves, the funders, the sponsors, the reviewers, as I said before. Furthermore, it is now widely accepted that the responsibility does not lie only on individual researchers, but that we have to look also at the organizational level. And organizations can support misconduct by valuing or accepting certain unethical activities or expecting performance without paying attention to how they were actually achieved. This was also mentioned by Kim before. The null findings are not valued at all. And promoting attitudes and techniques that also reduce For example, the feeling of guilt, this is also what we found maybe in our conversations with, I forgot to mention, we actually had the conversations with all the researchers in the cases that I presented. So we didn't just write, I know this is in the ideal world that it would be possible to work in every case like this, but we had conversations with the researchers. We kind of managed to create a space where a research ethics committee can be something that supports research, not just maybe inhibits unethical practice. So also by promoting attitudes and techniques that reduce the feeling of guilt, as I said, when people warn others about research misconduct. Kim was mentioning whistleblowing. And by fostering organizational cultures that create conditions or encourage misconduct to kind of try to go against it. So the ethical principles of research, which also must be said, are constantly evolving, of course. And there is also now an expectation that both individuals and institutions participate in that. And the role of research ethics committees to provide ethical oversight of the research and their value and importance lies, I think, in safeguarding the key principles of research, and actually, as I said before, supports the researchers doing the most ethical practices possible. As I think we all might also agree, ethics cannot be formalized because ethical research conduct is a matter of personal judgment also, and personal responsibility to some extent, in relation, as I said, to the community, the research community. And research governance can be one aspect of the research management, but adherence to ethical protocol and research plan that gets validated through the ethics review process is not sufficient when the researcher is conducting the actual research and unexpected situations arise. As I mentioned before, maybe the relatives will ask about the final interview. When the researcher is forced to make immediate decisions about the ethical concerns, or when information that is being revealed in the research process suggests that the researcher or the participants are at risk in the case there. So after all, ethics and moral theory are about making judgments and about actions and experiences as good or bad. So research ethics is usually understood as a set of moral values and virtues and principles and standards that are indicators of ethical research practice and behavior. But what I think is actually central is not how to prevent unethical research behavior, but how to encourage and support researchers to act ethically in all cases. Because I think, as we might also agree, the choices that we make, the decisions that we take have so many layers of impact, and these are really relevant. And so it is important that we are addressing these issues and questions along a broad spectrum of, again, processes, methods, purposes, and values in general. So just to conclude, thank you so much. Ethical practice, I would say, coming from the discussions that we had in this committee, doesn't mean anticipating and responding to ethical dilemmas and allowing for ethical considerations at every stage of the research process. It also means evaluating and developing ethical awareness, I would say, that helps us then in making the really quick decisions when they need to be done. It also means, I think this is also what Kim's speech reinforced today, it also means having the confidence to discuss the dilemmas and the uncertainties, both with our colleagues, peers, mentors, and when this is appropriate, and sometimes it is, and sometimes a bit less, also with the research subjects themselves. And I think, finally, yes, to ask as many questions as we can continuously and try to discuss them openly and transparently to find the best solutions and ideas coming from our experience. So finally, I will read this one out as well. Research efforts might never be ethically think they should be ethically sound, and we can contribute to that by creating the cultures that support it as well. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much, Anna, for your very inspiring and getting us deep into the questions and all the issues that we can cross. And I like sense of ask as many questions as we can, because it's just to discuss what our feeling, our perception and relation, and find a way to do it. Okay, so thank you very much. And I think that now we can have some space for discussion or question from the floor. If somebody wants to say something or ask or make some example, have some comments, clarifications, and this kind. And in the meanwhile, I also ask at home if who wants to say something. Thank you, Agnese. Do you want to come here? Thank you.
Thank you for the interesting presentations. I wanted to ask Kim a bit more about the embedded and invisible ethics, because this year a famous American family demographer died, Sarah McLennan, at the University of Princeton, and I read the obituary and something got stuck in my mind. She studied single mothers and basically the life course of their children. And the obituary said that at the beginning she didn't want to create a study, the fragile family longitudinal study, because as a single mother herself, she sort of felt she was too engaged into the topic. And this stuck with me because as a family demographer myself, I found myself researching topics through my academic life course that were very much in line with what in that time I was living. So, leaving the parental home when I was younger, starting a partnership, becoming a parent, now being a parent during the academic. And so I very much found myself in possibly facing a problem now, which is orienting my research interest for sure, but can you say a little bit more? Shall I be concerned? And what would you recommend me thinking about? And yeah, any other advice or reflections you may share?
Great, thank you so much for sharing it. And I wanted to make sure I get the name of that, the person you mentioned. In social work practice, we have the term countertransference, which means when we're working with clients, we may consciously or unconsciously identify with them because of something in our own past. And so part of what I've been thinking about, and actually we've been discussing, is how do we translate that into research, the way that we become conscious of our identification with the piece that we're studying, and just recognizing. So I would say my quick answer to you is, I don't think you need to be concerned because you're already thinking about it. You're already conscious about it. But also, and part of what that brings is a passion and an insider understanding, kind of going back to the positionality that Anna was talking about. I would say part of it is how we construct our teams and the way that we interrogate the work that we're doing to see how much of it is our projection and our own working through of our issues versus, there's no such thing as pure research, but being aware of those will help make sure that boundary is in existence. But it's something I'm still looking for in this. The me search is really what gets the most, is sort of the path that I've been looking at right now, but trying to think about how do we have guidelines for countertransference in research the same way we do for countertransference in practice.
Thank you very much, Kim. Is it okay, Anna? Does somebody else want to say something or to ask comments? That's Chiara, thank you. Do you want to come here? Yes.
Thank you for the questions. I think I will also resort back to social work. I don't know, maybe it's now a burden to come from the field of social work or not, because I also, the answer to this question would be, you were asking, you know, where's the limit between overburdening, but also being transparent and sharing with them so that they know our process as well and that they can contribute to it in ways that are meaningful to the research project as well. So I would say probably similarly than I say to our social work students, that authenticity and transparency is really important. But I think it's also very important what you are saying. It's not the participants' role to solve our dilemmas and problems. I think we need to, in particular research situations, we need to see what's beneficial for them also in contributing our solving, or at what stage maybe it can be kind of discussed. Maybe we can create, firstly, usually a safe space for their sharing of their story, and maybe we can come back to them later on with our dilemmas and ask them whether they would. So again, no proper answer, but more questions. But I would say that, yeah, finding this very fine balance, I think it's a great question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and then you can address the collective subjects if you want, since I know you've done parties. So I was reflecting back on my colleagues who do the anti-racist research presentation, and the challenge, not just for subjects or research participants, but anybody who is asked to contribute without being compensated for their contributions. And some of my colleagues have made said, oh, this is a US colloquialism perhaps, but can I just sit down and pick your brain for a minute? And then that wisdom or whatever never shows up in any kind of role or compensation or reward. And so thinking about the ways in which, if people are contributing, they are getting paid for it, which is difficult under many funding guidelines. One of the other forms of participation that's being discussed is inviting the participants to write the discussion or implications, to make commentary on the discussion and implications of the findings, so that those voices are reflected. So I really appreciate your sensitivity to burden. Those are just a couple of thoughts about how to make sure that when people are involved, their contributions are, we're not the only ones who benefit. Do you want to talk about collective subjects or communities? I mean, communities are exploited as as well as individuals, I think. And I think many communities that I think of that are the go-to place for certain kinds of research don't end up better for the having been picked apart in the research. And that may not be what you're talking about, but I think it's absolutely of a piece with what we've been discussing.
Yeah, I might not fully understand the question, or maybe I interpret it wrongly, but I think it's, especially in social research, we often study the particular people because of the group in which we envisage them being part of, right? So so what do we do in terms of, as Kim was saying before, also again, stereotyping, othering this group, exoticizing? Where do we have to be? Do we have to be the insider or the outsider to observe more, less, you know, again? and we see now, I think, through this conversation, how complex it really is and how much of fine-tuning there has to be. But I think, or I mean, the answer I usually have, it's not a good answer, but this is to where I've come to, is always state as much as possible about the perspectives you are taking. You know, we need to be reflexive about our own positions and our own participation and our own viewing of what we are doing and our own ability to interpret and to convey a message, or, you know, are we conveying their message, or is it simply our interpretation of the message? It's so delicate, and sometimes I'm quite sad that we don't actually get a lot of opportunities in qualitative research to actually write about that. Also in journal papers, maybe they have to be, you know, 15 pages and method and this and that, but there's usually no space to discuss exactly this. What does it happen in, you know, in the process of how do we, you know, fight through it in many ways? How do we take a stand? Where do we position ourselves? So again, transparency about that as much as we can, so that others can also judge it and look at it.
Well, I think this issue of the position, what is our position, what is our thinking about what is happening, it's very important to increase our awareness about what is going on. And also, I think that this issue of giving the right to give the words to what is happening, what is happening in the relationship, and what credits do we give to this process, or space of reflection. This kind of movement and dynamics contribute to our thinking, our knowledge, because obviously it's a collective thinking, it's collective knowledge, but what is the reciprocal weight we give, and what is the credit we recognize to our thinking, to the thinking of our team, and how do we involve subject, and how do we struggle and contrast, and all the thousands of little choices we do in any moment, the words we use. So this is, I think, it's, something can be very important and relevant, just to keep our awareness on this kind of things. Okay, thank you. And question.
Yeah, actually, yeah, we are starting a new journal, and one of the earliest discussions we had was actually how to make sure that we have a group of reviewers who do their work responsibly, with integrity, and also with respect and kindness as well. I mean, kindness, maybe the word sounds a bit, but you know, not as a, you know, because we often have also probably the experience of the whole publishing system just being a machinery that needs to be, it's different in different European countries, but for example, in my country, the demand for academics to publish in particular papers with particular index numbers and so on is so high. And we recently had a case of a person who kind of invented a system of how to multiply his number, you know, so there's a lot of misconduct there as well in the method of not only in the science, but just stemming from the demands. And yeah, I agree. I think that as also I try to mention, just the peer review, the quality of it, the scrutiny of it, the integrity of it, I think it's really, really important, and it contributes also to how researchers produce science and what are the aims when we produce it. And are we writing, you know, are we writing about the communities that we researched because, you know, we have to satisfy a certain readership, or, and this certain readership is peer review, for example, not the participants themselves, for example. So I think it raises a lot of questions, and I think again, I have no answers to that, because I think it's a real system, you know, it's a question of a system of, you know, of machinery of science. And I don't know how, maybe Giuseppe will have answers to that, but I agree, it's another important question that really impacts actually the ethics of research as well. Yeah.
This isn't a direct answer to your question, but you bring to mind a conversation I had with a colleague from another discipline who is sort of putting an economic value on the hours of things that we as academics do that are not compensated. And if we were to be paid for peer reviews, for whether it's for tenure, for external review, for tenure, grants, whatever, would that, I mean, would that change the way they're approached? Would there be a different value as opposed to seeing everything as voluntary service? And so, not relevant, but just made me have a little trip down memory lane, so.
Okay, thank you very much. Does somebody else from the floor have some questions, or from home? Okay, so thank you very much for everybody to have listened and posed question. Now I'm very glad that Giuseppe Alessandro Veltri is here with us. I think he will give us some hints regarding research integrity, but maybe also say something about comments or questions came out.
Okay, first of all, thank you for the two excellent presentations that precede me, that I guess already discussed a lot of the points. Before I start on my presentation, which focuses on research integrity and questionable research practices, I think what's going on now is that there is an increased awareness of research ethics, and what traditionally have been a very dense set of concerns, they've been unpacked in different ways. So we have concern about research ethics, we have concerns about privacy, and now we have concerns about research integrity. And we probably, we do see in institutions different degrees of formalization in a way of these concerns. So take privacy in Europe, we have now strict regulation, as we all know, GDPR. Although has some important exception for research publicly funded. We do have obviously ethical research committee. although traditionally they've been much more occupied with medical research, and only, I would say, in the past maybe 15 years, social science, and I think I also have an explanation for that, they became more involved. And then we have research integrity. Research integrity often it's difficult to distinguish some practices related to ethics, but it has tremendous consequences in at least two aspects. One is trust in science. Was mentioned before about the multiple layer consequences of these aspects. And also we shouldn't forget that in Europe, I would say, or at least in the majority of European countries, perhaps 80% of the research is publicly funded. And that means taxpayers' money. And that means that you are accountable for the money you spend. And if you do research that is essentially not ethical or not sound, not only you're doing a disservice to your community, your research, your institution, but also to the taxpayers. And this is not a small concern. In a situation of scarce resources, then people will ask why we should give more money to research if then it doesn't produce the results we expect. Anyway, so a lot of topics could be discussed onto this. Just one final thought. I think it's interesting what's happening in social science, because social science now, they started to introduce much more type of research that once we would classify, especially from a methodological point of view, from the medical research area, so RCTs, all the experiments, clearly they do have a set of ethical concerns, let's say, that they are different from let's say, a survey. Okay? Plus, there is the entire domain of digital research, which is huge. As you know, I remember there's one thing one example I cite in my digital methods book that is really always was almost like a eye opener to me about these issues. In 2014, Facebook did an experiment together with some, if I remember correctly, Princeton University researchers on the sort of mechanism of emotional contagion online. And they did an experiment where essentially millions of people, they got altered their news feed in order to see much more emotional content without them knowing that they were part of an experiment. And the study from a scientific point of view was definitely interesting, but from an ethical point of view was a horror. I mean, in fact, then they generated a huge debate about this type of methods. So that's something that you should bear in mind, that for all the digital kind of based research, there's a whole set of new problems emerge. Anyway, I'll try to be brief about these few slides I've prepared. This is part of a European project called SOPS for Eyes. Is one of the two EU projects funded on research integrity. And the aim of this project is to produce, at the end of the day, a toolkit for the European Commission to evaluate projects also on research integrity. We do have created a toolbox, which is on our website, that helps researchers to essentially self-evaluate themselves and kind of check a number of things. This is a huge project. I mean, inside this project, we are doing a number of different things. One thing we did was this large survey with researchers across several countries about questionable research practices, so the so-called QRPs, which are in the title. And I found we're still working on this data, but I think some of the results were quite interesting and really resonates with some of the concerns were raised by the previous two speakers. So what are the questionable research practices that we investigated? We investigated these 8 questionable research practices. I will read them because I guess they are fairly familiar to the life of any researchers. So the first one is willingly failing to cite relevant publications that contradict your own belief, theories, hypothesis, methods, or findings. Second is, when reviewing a manuscript, not investing the effort necessary to conduct a thorough review. Choosing not to report your findings if they could weaken or contradict your theories or hypotheses. Deliberately using another research unpublished idea without giving credit, for example, publishing an idea voiced by a colleague at an informal meeting without giving them credit. In a publication, failing to disclose relevant personal, financial, political, or intellectual conflict of interest. Another one is including authors on a paper who have not contributed sufficiently to the work to merit authorship. The seventh is inadequately supervising or mentoring junior co-workers. This is often PhDs or postdocs. And the last one is carrying out research without getting the required ethical approval. So these are let's say, we found out most of the common QRPs. And of course, one big challenge for those who wants to study this thing is that, well, you know, it's not possible you can ask people to admit, you know, how much of this stuff they've done, but ultimately there is no way to find out exactly how much they've done. However, a number of studies shows that, you know, if you provide enough condition of anonymity, people are pretty honest about this stuff. In a way, because maybe not about themselves, but about the environment in which they work. In fact, we surveyed both about not only what they did, but, you know, what happens in their own environment. So let's see some results. So the most common one, let's say, are in a way things that we consider less among the QRPs, less sort of dire type of research integrity infraction. So the first one is including authors who are not contributed sufficiently. Now, of course, we know in research there is tremendous pressure for this. Very gigantic project, you know, collective work where a lot of people are. This is particularly true, I would say, in the natural sciences, but now it's becoming true also in the social science. Not conducting a thorough review. Well, you know, we all know that time is an extremely scarce resource. The amount of publication produced is simply huge because the incentives are to produce more knowledge, or at least more publications, or rather more knowledge, and not to consolidate on what is available. And also there is an admission that actually quite a lot of people do not supervise well junior researchers. We all heard about exploitations of PhDs or postdocs in many ways. And then you have, you know, to kind of a degree of gravity, well, to say, sort of more serious infraction, they go down in terms of frequency. The one where basically people stole an idea of or another researcher, you know, very few people tend to admit that. But these are the kind of aggregate data that, you know, they don't tell us much really, unless we start to do a bit of breakdowns that they are interesting. The first one, obviously, is that it became very clear to us that there were differences between disciplines, different areas. And we will see also between researchers at different career stages. And so these are differences that, you know, can tell us a bit of a different story. So you can see here that we have 4 groups: humanities, medical sciences, natural sciences, and social sciences. There are some reasons for these groupings. But what you can see is that basically there are certain things that are particularly relevant for the medical sciences. You see the one including authors who have not contributed sufficiently, not conducting a thorough review, although it's a problem for everyone. Then you have the junior co-worker issue, which becomes also a problem. Now, social sciences, which is the red dot, is pretty much involved in everything. But essentially, what you see here is that the main concern for social science really comes to the review issue of adding people that not contributed, and then of not reporting findings that contradict your own theories. And similarly also failing to cite publication that contradict your beliefs, and choosing not to report your own findings that contradict your theories. So we see that there are some differences. we know that there are different research practices, and in fact, the orientation is often, at least for research integrity, is to build toolkits, so indication guidelines. They are kind of specific for disciplines or disciplinary areas, let's say. The other big difference is in career stages. Now, you can see here that the early career people, so the blue dots, are often, they're basically wording this issue of including authors who have not contributed sufficiently. That's not a big surprise, because early career suffered the pressure of senior researchers, and so they have to include them even though they've done nothing, for example. But also they suffer of the strong pressure to publish as much as they can, and so they essentially admit the failing of contradicting their own theories, and also of including, of reporting findings that contradicted their results. Essentially, they have the very strong sort of publication pressure. There are slightly different type of pressures for the mid-career and later career. I mean, we can't go through that anyway, but the general message here is that we come at the end of this presentation, the fact that at the institutional level, the orientation is becoming that you need appropriate intervention by this type of breakdown, because you don't really have a one-size-fits-all approach on a situation where the stakes are very different, the research practices are very different. And so that is one point that is important. It's important also for another reason, that the one thing you want to avoid is that you have a generalist approach that is just a box-ticking exercise. So people perceive it as a box-ticking exercise. We just do that, so we forget about it. And the more generalist it is, so the less is grounded in the actual research practices specific to a disciplinary areas, the more is the risk that would happen. So we have also differences by countries. Now, in general, this is the mean admitted QRPs. So the higher means you do more QRPs. In general, what you see is that certain countries do admit more QRPs. Italy is pretty high, together with Spain, Greece, Cyprus, Slovakia, Belgium, Lithuania, and so on. Now, there is a reason for that. The reason is that some of the countries you see on the bottom part are the ones that they have started to integrate training, but also awareness on research integrity quite some time ago. In Europe, which is the context I know a bit better, it's very clear that the Scandinavian countries, they're quite different, because they've started to do this at least 10 years ago, at least. And so you see them that they are a bit different. And in the case of other countries, they simply started much later. Then, of course, there might be some structural reasons for these differences, which I cannot go into the details right now, but that seems to be the common theme. And this is, I mean, if you look by country and disciplines, what comes out is basically the same country difference holds for all disciplines. So we would just suggest which is a structural problem rather than disciplinary differences within countries. So essentially, the problem is at the institutional level in these different countries. Now, an interesting point is that, okay, let's say we want to intervene, but one important aspect is how much confidence people have in their institution to ensure that research integrity is implemented. Because otherwise, all the good intention, the risk is that they hit, the problem of having not enough trust in the institution they're dealing with. And we definitely got a problem in Italy. We are among the worst that have trust in their institution. and then you see, here you see the difference I was mentioning before. You got the Scandinavians on top, okay, Iceland, Finland, Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, then you get UK, Belgium. We also had Canada and US, although the sample are not particularly big on this, with those two researchers, and then all the others. So we have a situation where any initiative at the organizational level, if it's not accompanied by clearly a confidence that the institution wants to really achieve the goals and not introducing another layer of bureaucracy, is doomed to fail. Now, this is also an interesting point, is awareness of organizational policy by career stage. So how much people are aware of what already exists in their institution about research integrity. And what you can see is that are the later career or even the retired in some cases, they are the most aware. And the early career and mid-career, which are the ones that would benefit the most of this stuff, they are not very much aware. So that suggests big issues of communication between institutions in their early careers. So they simply don't know what's going on. Well, that's the confidence in organization to ensure a high level of research integrity by country. Well, here I just put it Italy because it's a huge graph. But basically, we are again on the kind of bottom part, not particularly high, but what you can see is that there are 30% in red that basically have very little confidence that their institution will ensure high level of research integrity. And ensuring high level of research integrity means also punishment or some, well, punishment, let's say, some measure against those who breach research integrity. So if there is the idea that basically research integrity is not a priority and whatever breach is not going to lead to anything really, that usually what happens is there is this fairly low level of confidence. And this is, I think, also a very interesting thing, is the proportion of respondents indicating to receive at least some information regarding research integrity from specific source by career stage. Now, what you can see here is that the biggest source of information are actually my scholarly community. So there is a positive pressure of the scholarly community about this. Research collaborators, journals that were mentioned before. A huge also aspect is funding organization that we'll see. Professional bodies where those apply, of course, not in all cases. But you see that my organization is kind of in the middle, and then you have other sources. The department usually is not a good source of this information. The senior colleagues also sort of depends on your career stage. So also in terms of channel of communication, it's interesting to see that there isn't one channel, there isn't one way of pressuring for research integrity. In another study we just finished, what we found out is that actually the biggest source of pressure to improve research integrity are coming at the moment from RFO, so research funding organization. So because now those who give you the money to do research require research integrity checklist and some kind of plan, then you are forced to think about it. And it's basically the same transformation that the ethical requirements provide at the beginning. Until ethical guidelines were not, ethical approval was not asked as a part of the process in publication or research funding applications, by many was considered essentially a box ticking exercise. So I'll stop here now. We have done a lot of thinking about how to translate this. Of course, the findings I've just mentioned are just a fraction of the overall study we have done. And how to translate these insights in some kind of suggestions and policies. And we did this paper in Nature a couple of years ago now on how to suggest to institutions how to essentially create the conditions for improving research integrity based on this data on different research practices, different disciplines, but also the role of funding agency, the role of within the institutions of different, let's say, layers of governance and so on. The evolution of these suggestions are now being sort of put together in this policy toolkit that will be one of the outcome of the project. So hopefully then that will be available obviously to anyone. But the idea here is to understand that there are certain good practices, of course, we can learn from different countries, but there's also a high degree of specificity of different, bear in mind that the university systems in Europe are essentially different in each country. So there isn't one set of regulation, one set of system for, I don't know, career promotion or you name it. So there are things that are clearly affected by this. And then there are practices. We found very different practices in, I don't know, law department compared to medical science, compared to social science about, for example, the role of PhD students, or how they're mentored, or the authorship issue. So in that respect, you cannot just go there and impose one new rule and say, well, now you should stick to this. Because it then, all these practices, they were linked to the sort of ecology of that system. So if career promotion worked in a particular way, publication worked in a particular way, that meant that all the subsequent action of research were sort of adaptive to that kind of environment. If you go there and change that, it create really a big problem. So I'll stop here because probably talked too much.
So thank you very much. It's been very, very interesting. And it's really a nice feeling from the very individual and micro regard to this overall. And also this last message that I got, that we have to strengthen the community, the scholar community and the organization to support a really thoughtful practice in research. So, I don't know if somebody has some final comments. Thank you. Yes. So they can hear also. Yes, thank you. So Mario, he is the director of the Center for Methodology, Hans Kade.
Don't claim any particular expertise for that, but I think the combination of the different talks clicked really. And the last one, it reminded me in many ways of Hannah Arendt, and in particular Hannah Arendt's book on Eichmann in Jerusalem. At one point, when the book came out, I think it was late 60s, early, anyway, made, of course, the big steer, the recognition of the explicit recognition of the role that the committees of Jewish committee or the Jewish, say, notables in the different ghettos had played in securing and implementing Nazi policies on the light of ground. They were meaning to improve the policy. It was a sort of contribution to give a contribution to make life a little bit more tolerable for the residents in the ghettos, etc. And I want to make a straight comparison to that. But the question is, what are, not the fact that, of course, research integrity is important, but what comes out from the combination of some of the evidence that we have seen here? I think it's very relieving the fact that on the one hand, you say, that the most important source of advice regarding what is ethical and what is integral is, at the end of the day, it is the scholarly community. Whereas the biggest pressure to set the guidelines for ethics comes from the funding authorities. Now, the funding authorities, I mean, I've got only anecdotal knowledge. Funding authorities, and I worked, by the way, I was professor in Britain for several years, long time ago, bloody hell, 25 years. And so I got a sense of the process when it was coming up. And frankly, I mean, most of them were failed, most of the guys in those positions were failed academics. let's face it. And so the question is, the difficulty is, where do we draw a balance? Where do we draw the line? Where do we find the balance between the fact that research is ultimately a process of trial and error? Where do we input failure in delivering substantive results to malpractice, deliberate ethical malpractice? Even some of the criteria that you have listed there come out are extremely disputed. For example, the issue of authorship, where we have very clearly the idea of the senior guy who signs the article without having done bloody nothing, frankly. But I mean, there are many intermediate situations which are not really very easy to capture. For example, very often I've got evidence of several cases in which the place where you publish also matters. And now the senior author who doesn't do apparently a lot first has another function, which is the function of guaranteeing to the publisher. I can cite lots of books which ended up with Cambridge or Oxford University presses, not because which were written practically by junior people to which the senior author corresponded very little, but a very irrelevant, very difficult, intangible element, which is reputation. Reputation doesn't mean it's not only built on ties, networks, dinners, pleasant in fashionable restaurants. It's built on previous work. Therefore, is a part of the work of the test. So it's also testifying to the quality of some work, and that's built on reputation. People took seriously this type of activity are actually performing an important role, and this also reflects sometimes in the co-authorship. There are other questions which are some of the indicators of practices. What is appropriate supervision? That's a hugely disputable matter, extremely delicate matter, which I don't think will be settled by defining specific guidelines. It's a matter which is, again, comes down ultimately to the practice of the community and to the element that Giuseppe was identifying. The most important part is the scholarly community in itself. Ditto for the review. What is a thorough review? Is it a thorough review, 2-3 pages of detailed comment? Is it a thorough review, a review which picks 2 or 3 essential points and draw the author's attention to that? Yet again, we could go on discussing that for ages. And now, I'm not saying that all those points are not relevant. They are relevant. What I think we need to pay a lot of attention is the context in which they're taking place. And I don't buy a critic that accept that we're accountable to the taxpayer. There are all sorts of there are flaws. There are problems with the research process which are not directly related. We know that there is a lot of yes, there is a fair element of unethical, not integral behavior. There is in business, there is in the public administration, there is including in the people that operate, lead the funding bodies, because I know them we know them as well, and so we know it's not blatantly clear. What I'm saying is that I think my comment is, while being very careful and sensitive to these issues, we also need to be aware of the fact that we're not exactly all in the same boat. The research community has, I think, the ability, not an uncritical ability, but I think it's a decent mechanism inside itself to deal with these issues without letting them entirely in the hands of the funders or the representative of the taxpayers. I mean, I would really put taxpayers out of the way in this context.
Thank you very much, Marco. Anna or Giuseppe wants to give some feedback about this. Comment.
Well, what I'm thinking of is to revise my slide of the elevator screen where the floors above zero are the norms of the scientific community, the norms of the institution, the discipline, and then it's the issue of how do we create ethical cultures? How do we create norms to fill the space that cannot be filled by policies and procedures?
Yeah, I would just say, values. I mean, and how do we, as you said now, it's about the community, and it's also about the independence also in a way of science, and how do we nurture that through the independence of these professions as well in some ways, and how do we manage the different relationships. So thank you for your comment.
I am sympathetic. I mean, I know the position of Mario, but it's true. I mean, it's really complicated. I mean, I just give you this example. If you go to, I'm visiting professor University of Copenhagen, okay, and I'm co-supervising a PhD students there. And when I went there, they gave me this probably 3 or 4 pages guidelines of what it means for them to supervise a PhD student. It is very clear what you can do or what you cannot do. Okay. Now, in a way, I would say that it was probably not necessary, because I would probably not do what I was not supposed to do according to that sheet, and I would do the rest. I always done that way anyway. Okay, but it was in a way kind of liberating, because it was a bit like outsourcing. The designer said, okay, this is the boundaries of what I have to do. However, that can be a straitjacket, obviously, because it can happen that, a PhD student, it wasn't the case in this particular instance, but would require some extra things you have to do. And one could say, well, this is what I have to do. I don't have to do extra. Why should I? Nobody's asking me to do extra. And that's the risk. That's the risk that, if you start to regulate everything, nobody will go the extra mile, because you say, well, that's what I'm supposed to do or what I'm not supposed to do. Now, for research, I think it's a different story, because in research, there is I think there are 2 competing pressures. One is publish as fast as I can, the best you can, the best meaning in the best outlet you can. So there is a tremendous pressure of not doing the extra work of checks. Okay. And on the other hand, we got a serious problem of, we can discuss hours for why that is the case, of, let's say, how solid research findings are, especially in the social sciences. Okay. And these 2 are clearly, 2 contrasting forces that, I can quote the old Carter Levine, in the field of forces, they are really opposite. And especially junior researchers are caught exactly in the middle of this, because you simply don't have the time, the resources to do all the checks and all the proper work you have to do. And if I apply that to myself, I have no problem admitting that when I published on my own, it was almost impossible to do all the checks I was supposed to do. When I published in a team, It was different because somebody helped me. We did it together. When we started to aim to really top journal, we knew they would ask that. They ask you everything you've done, everything. And then, of course, if you know that you're going to, but again, all this cannot be considered in a vacuum because time pressure to publish more and more. Research funding is also a different story because research funding, again, to do certain type of research, you need money. Research ain't cheap. Now, that means that you somehow have to play the game of the research funders. And you're captured by this. Okay? I mean, I remember that when I left the UK, I also worked in the UK, they had a figure, a specific person in the department called the responsible for grant capture. That was the title. I guess you have the same in the US, perhaps. So that was the idea. You have to capture these grants that appear every now and then. And if you don't play the game of these funders, you don't get it. As simple as that. Now, funders are increasingly more and more concerned of funding research that then turn out to be problematic. That's the problem. So imagine someone who funded the famous Tuskegee, like in the case, public administration, the consequences are, now of course we live with a different sensitivity about this. You end up, let's say in our case, we have the European institutions, funding research that turn out to be problematic. It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. So I can understand their concern, but again, it becomes a sort of uncoordinated effort of trying to maximize this idea of having better research, better integrity, ethically sound research, without understanding how these things interplay with each other. And I think that's really the problem.
Do you want to add something? Or just, okay. So, well, thank you very much. And well, I think we are going to not hand. Okay, and unless somebody from home wants to say something. Okay, so let me give you some very few words as a closing. There are lots of thoughts that come out in my mind during this very, very interesting putting at the same table different views that is really fascinating. One is that I'm very glad that we have created a situation to deal with a problem that is not very often discussed in that sense. And I was thinking about this idea of guidelines as a comfort. Others can say that, okay, I do this and not that one, but also as a boundary, as a limit. And this is something that for social work is very, very common. So I was thinking that social workers are usually in this ambiguity on how far do we respect and how far do we take discretion, position, how do we speak up for change. And so this is something that is very interesting, gives me the meaning that, well, I think social science do this in general, but I think the social work has developed special thinking about what is the ambiguity of being in this middle ground, because Habermas says that, Habermas and Walter Lawrence, they say that social work is in the middle ground between the system and the vital words, mondi vitali, vital words. So, and this is the middle system, is very complex. And the other thing that I want to underline, to pick up, is that doing research trying to be ethically sound is a dynamic, it's not fixed. And is a dynamic that is marked by relationship in a context of power. So I think that developing our awareness on knowing that we are immersed in this kind of constant challenges, but also the richness of being in the water flowing, and that this is something that I find that if we create a community, the capacity to discuss about these different things and to keep our awareness high, it would be very, very important and enriching. So maybe we can lift up our, in the lift to the high floor. So thank you very much to everybody. It will be a very, very interesting afternoon. And thank you to Giuseppe, Alessandro, Veltri. Thank you, Anna Sobočan. Thank you, Kim Strom. And thank to you that you've been here. And have a nice evening.